what I love.
Hello, I'm Scruffy, and today I'd like to reflect on the adaptive music systems in Pikmin 4 by comparing them to Pikmin 3. Not to figure out which one is better, mind you, I love them both. Instead, I hope this comparison will illustrate a nebulous but very important property of these soundtracks, their scope. That is, the boundaries of how much and how complex of music is made for a game, defined by the limits of a console or a game engine, the vision of composers and programmers on how the music should operate, and most of all, the budget and deadlines of the game. Determining the scope of a project like this should be a very early priority. That way you know how much work is ahead of you. And if you wanted to make that work more efficient, you would especially seek to design and implement an extensible adaptive music system. Extensible means as long as you structure your music in a certain way, the system will play back any piece of music you give it. And you can imagine that would influence the sort of music you write, since you'd want to write music with a straightforward recipe that's easy for the system to handle. So with that in mind, let's check out what kinds of systems Pikmin 3 and Pikmin 4 use. And for this video, I'll focus on the looping music for overworld areas and caves you explore. In Pikmin 3, you've got a substantial ensemble performing a less melody-focused, not too percussive, more texture-focused tune, as a base layer. And then there are 3 other layers that respond to conditions in the game. If Pikmin are working on a task, like building a bridge or destroying a wall, the low end gets bolstered with a rich, more driving musical layer. If Pikmin are carrying something, the high end gets bolstered with a more elaborate, typically sparklier instrument layer. And if you're fighting an enemy, an intense percussion track fades in, usually featuring timpani, bells, and cymbals. This is the case for every area theme besides the Formidable Oak, the lighter, shorter sunset variations of those area themes, the theme for every cave you explore, the theme for a rainy day, the theme for Alf's tutorial on day 1, and even the 3 different mission mode stage themes. They all use this system. In fact, when Pikmin 3 Deluxe rolled around, all the new music for the side stories missions also used the same system. That's some good future-proofing. So it certainly seems the music team for Pikmin 3 defined a clear, concise music-playing machine that expects a specific, straightforward input, a package of 4 synchronous, looping stereo tracks of music, and then easily plays the base layer and adds the other 3 layers in response to game events. It's a very extensible system, because you barely have to change how this machine operates once it's functional. Instead, you can focus on making music that is appropriate for the machine. So it's interesting to hear that Pikmin 3's music is deliberately organized for this system. You know, all the combat tracks use the same timpani and bells. All the carrying tracks, while different, emphasize higher sounds. They really wanted this system to communicate clearly to the player, even if the player is never expressly told to listen out for it. And since this system is small and manageable, it behooves you to reuse it as much as you can, even for the occasional edge case. For example, bingo battle stages use this model of adaptive music. It's just that the conditions that add new layers are different. When one team is 1 item away from a bingo, you get this goofy little track. And if that team is carrying the final item they need, a layer of Pikmin voices will be added, one chanting "Kopai" and the other one "Hokkotate." They're separate tracks, so both can play at once if both teams meet that condition. The system that plays this bingo battle music was easily derived from the main game system, and still operates with the same type of input, a package of synchronous, looping stereo tracks of music. In fact, just to nerd out a little more for a second, each music file like this isn't even treated as 4 separate stereo tracks. Rather, it's 1 track with 8 channels. Stereo music files can hold plenty more than 2 channels of audio. For example, you'd need an audio file with 6 channels to play through a standard surround sound system, which has 6 different speakers. So this one has 8 channels, and instead of assigning each channel to a different speaker, it's assigning groups of 2 channels to the left and right components of each layer in this adaptive system. This is an important distinction because it prevents these layers from ever desynchronizing. They're all part of the same file, so they all have the same timing information. And that's why all these adaptive tracks in Pikmin 3 come with no more than 8 channels. I just find that rather elegant. Now, let's compare that to Pikmin 4's approach. In the overworld areas and in caves, Pikmin 4 doesn't use layering for combat or carrying items or working on obstacles. Instead, it adds a unique musical layer for every single type of enemy you encounter, aside from bosses and mid-bosses. If you have a dwarf bulborb in your vicinity, you'll hear a particular synth instrument added to the music, which, in my opinion, kind of resembles its voice. If you're near a fiery blowhog, you'll hear a stout, oscillating little synth playing staccato notes, which to me resembles the trotting little footsteps it takes. And if both these enemies are near you, both musical layers get added to the stack. Now consider that more than 80 unique enemies in this game can be part of this system, and they each get unique instruments assigned to them. So every time you want to create a new music track for this system to play, you need to account for which of those 80 plus enemies appear in a particular area, so you can compose layers with those instruments that sync up with the base layer. You can hear the influence of this huge system on the musical compositions themselves. The base layers are very ambient and very quiet, mainly just establishing harmonic progression with hardly any melody, because they have to leave plenty of room for all the different, more noticeable instruments that each enemy can add. This system is still extensible per se. You don't have to change this machine once it's up and operating. But creating an input for this machine is suddenly a much more rigorous task. And granted, not every piece of area music comes with all 80 plus possible layers. The only layers in the game files are the appropriate ones for the enemies that appear in the final game. But that still means the music team would have had to work closely with the level designers to determine which enemies are appearing where, and thus which music needs to be delivered. The scope of this project, thanks to its complexity and volume of work, is larger than Pikmin 3's, and all else being equal, that means it's more ambitious. And serious kudos to them for pulling it off. It's really fun to hear each enemy get its own idiosyncratic instrument that gives it a little more personality. But there are trade-offs to making the system this complex. For one, you have enough work to do on the area themes and cave themes alone, so you might not be able to reuse this system as often. Side mode music, like Dandori battle themes, operate under much simpler rules that were not derived from the main game system. In fact, Dandori challenge music isn't adaptive at all. And I don't want to indicate that the scope of the project necessarily caused that. There are plenty of reasons to make such music less complex. But even Olimar's Shipwreck Tale, which uses remixed versions of the main game's area themes, contains no adaptive music. It's not using this big system they already created. And I'm curious if the music team would have wanted to use it more if, for example, they had more time and resources to work on it. Another trade-off to consider here is scalability, another feature of any programming system. Could this machine handle all 80-plus music-assigned enemies surrounding you at once? These layers are loaded in as separate audio files and played concurrently, so would they all play at the same time with no desync? Now that's really nothing to worry about when the game is complete and self-contained. And it's likely been stress-tested on the Nintendo Switch to ensure it never passes the console's limits or Unreal Engine's limits. But those limits are a consideration in the future if you make new content, even a whole sequel, that reuses this in-house system. Especially at a big volume like this, you always have to assume some player out there, by chance or by their own scrutinous determination, is going to put your system to the test. But once again, I'm not saying any of this to knock Pikmin 4's audio system. I'd sooner congratulate the team for taking on a more ambitious music project and seeing it through, leaving no enemy in the main game unsung. And I have a hunch that the bigger scope in Pikmin 4 versus the more reusable system in Pikmin 3 is a sign of a higher budget and a longer timeline. I mean, Pikmin 3's team had to rush to turn what was a Wii game into a Wii U launch title, and they had to delay that. so it stands to reason they'd want to get as much mileage as possible out of any system they had already built. But they did, and that's an elegant way to make more of your music interactive and hold up the tradition set by Pikmin 1 and 2. Whether you wish to give yourself an easier time, letting all your game music operate under some straightforward rules, or you want to shoot for the moon and give every enemy its own instrument to add to every mix, that's something to figure out as early as you can, so you can visualize the workload ahead of you, and so you can build your machine that can handle any music you throw at it. Thank you very much for scoping out this topic with me, and I hope you can return to either of these games with a renewed appreciation for the craftsmanship that goes into not only writing the music, but implementing it. And of course, as always, I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon, who help keep my video making process sustainable. If you'd like to support my work directly and get perks like your credit here, seeing videos early, a vote on what music I arrange, and more behind-the-scenes content, you can visit my Patreon link in this video's description. And with that, I'm Scruffy, and thank you very much for watching.